Hi, this is Stevie. Today I'm doing a sketch of the Salt River horses, and this is at the Salt River near Mesa, Arizona, close to where I live. I only live 5 minutes away from there. So I had done a sketch based on some photos that I took a few years back, and I kind of combined a few things here. I have the Salt River, and then I took a few of the horses from one of my photos and dropped them in the sketch. And I also included a picture of, or a sketch of Red Mountain up at the top of the sketch. I had to include that because I live right near there and it's such a beautiful mountain. And the Salt River runs right by it. And also at the very front of my sketch, you'll see that's a sketch of a great blue heron. And there's quite a few of those up at the river, and it's quite common to see them. So I had drawn the title Salt River Horses in that circle, and I made quite a few errors on it. So I want to show you how I corrected them with a Posca pen, because Posca pens are very opaque. It's acrylic ink, and they're very handy to have around. So on to doing Red Mountain, painting Red Mountain. I started out with my transparent orange for the light side of the mountain, and on the shadow side I'll add some darker colors. But Red Mountain is very red, and it's just really beautiful in the bright sunlight. So I started out with my transparent orange, then I added quinacridone burnt orange to the shadow side, and then to further make the shadow I added some cobalt blue violet to the quin burnt orange to get that shadow color. And I like that combination. It came out pretty good. Now on to painting some distant mountains, part of my Red Mountain sketch. And I had mixed up some cobalt blue and a bit of manganese blue and some of my quin burnt orange to get that purplish gray color. And now just putting in some of the desert foliage with some of my oranges, and I probably added a little bit of green there to get in the desert foliage. And right up next to the river, the grasses get darker green, so I first added my light green, which is a green gold, and then I'll go back in and add some darker green over it to sit right next to the river. People come from all over the world to see the Salt River horses, and in the wintertime, it's quite a busy area. We live close to the road that goes up there, and it's quite busy actually all the time, but really in the wintertime. And there I'm putting in a saguaro cactus. There's quite a few saguaros around here, and so just dropping that in, trying to indicate some light on the light side of the saguaro, and a more distant one there, and then an even more distant one. I just use a mix of different greens and a little bit of yellow to paint in those saguaros. And if I need to gray it down a bit, I add some orange to it. And back to in front of Red Mountain, there are some smaller hills there, and I'm just getting those in. This sketch took me quite a while to do. My original video was 2 hours, and I had to cut it way down and speed it up. But I hope it gives you an idea of how I did this, and maybe it provides you some helpful tips. The horses, the reason they're along the Salt River is there are lots of tall grasses in the river, and they like to eat the tall grasses. So they're very well fed, and they move up and down the river. They'll be at different areas at different times, and it's just the luck of the draw where to go to see them. Just depends on where they are at the time. Where we saw them and took these photos was at an area called Fawn D. Sutton Recreation Area. But you can see them in all different areas of the Salt River. I think early morning and late afternoon might be your best bets to see them. Just finishing up the Salt River there with my Red Mountain sketch. I left a little bit of white in that water to indicate some movement in the water because the water is constantly moving. The other thing the Salt River is well known for is tubing on the Salt River. And there's quite a bit that goes on in the summertime. Well, all times of the year, but mostly in the summer. And I'm just about finished with that sketch of Red Mountain. I was a little concerned that I got it so close to the other sketch, but I think it'll be okay. Finishing a cactus in the background. Now onto my bigger sketch, and I started out with my sky color, my usual sky color of manganese blue with a little bit of cobalt blue, and I usually add a little bit, just a touch of permanent rose to that. And this is a challenge right now. It's so hot here right now in Arizona. I'm trying to keep that paper wet so that I can blend the color. I didn't wet the paper first. This particular sketchbook, I wasn't sure how that would work, so I decided not to wet the paper first. And it turned out all right. I got some blooms, but I still like how the sky came out. This is an 8x8 sketchbook. Now on to the trees that are along the river. There's trees and then some tall reeds that are in front of them. And so I started out with I started out with raw sienna. I didn't want the color to be too bright. So I started with raw sienna, then added some yellows and a little bit of the green gold, and some of my quinacridone burnt orange for the darker areas of the trees. Just varying that color as I go. And I had sped up this video because it turned out to be such a long video. But I wanted to give you a good sense of all the steps involved in doing this. And I started to add more green to the bottoms of those trees just to separate it from what's going to be in front of it. And then for the more distant mountains in the background, I just mixed up a grayish color using my what was left on my palette of the sky, the colors from the sky, and mixed it with some quinacridone burnt orange. And then I darkened it a bit for that front layer of mountains. Now onto those tall reeds that were right along the shoreline. And I don't know what the best way was to represent these. This was the best I could do. They're just kind of sticky reeds that stand up along the shore of the river. Quite a few of them. And they're almost the same color as the trees behind them, so that was kind of a challenge, which is why I put that extra dark green in between the two layers of color. Just really a variation of the colors I had already on my palette. The burnt orange, a little bit of orange, the green gold, and then I used some of my cobalt blue violet to mix up a darker color for the shadows at the bottom of the reeds. And moving on to more trees there next to the reeds. And as you go down toward the left of the sketch, those trees got brighter in color. So I added more of the yellow to those at the top to indicate that bright yellow color. We took these photos in the month of January, so those bright colors are not there all year. In the summertime, it's very dreary, drab looking, but in January, they looked really pretty. Just moving along, finishing those layers of trees. Then there are some stones that I sketched in front of those trees. There I'm just fixing up some of those reeds on the right-hand side. Indicating a few more of those along the edges. I just wanted to get a little more dark at the bottom of those trees and foliage. So I went back in and added some more dark color, either the Quinburn orange or a mix of greens. Now I went back in and still added yet more green to the bottoms of those distant trees to just separate them from the layer that's in the front. They really weren't that green at the bottom of those trees, but I think it did well to help separate them. Now on to the little rocks at the shore along the river. And I just sketched in some of those rocks, and I'm painting the bottoms of the rocks with a gray that I mixed up, and trying to leave the tops of those rocks white just to show some sunlight on them. And then there were some reeds laying in the water over toward the right side of my sketch, and I just went back in and painted those. And there were also some beautiful reflections in the water from all that yellow foliage. So I was adding that color into the water, trying to keep it wet and blend it down. I didn't want any hard edges there. And I really liked that the shadows that were reflecting in, not the shadows, but the trees that were reflecting in the water. Unfortunately, I lost a lot of that when I added the blue to the water, but live and learn. I wish I had added less of the blue. You'll see that in a moment. Sorry that part of my sketch is out of the frame here, but I'll fix that in a minute. I started adding the water. I used cobalt blue for the water, and here is where I wish I had left more of the reflection color and not covered up so much of it with the blue. Live and learn. So I'll have to think of a better way to do this in the future. I think just a little bit less of the blue color, just let the reflection show and leave it at that. Here I was spritzing my sketchbook to take off. I thought the blue color was way too dark. I took some of it off, and it worked okay to take it off, but I ended up ruining the bottom of the page of my sketchbook. So that's a caution to be careful about doing that. So I dried off my paper and went back again and added some more blue, trying to not fill it in so much, which I don't know that I was that successful at that. But anyway, this is the way I did it. All of that blue still bothers me, and I'm going to go back later on and try and break that up by adding a little bit of white ink. Anyway, on to painting the horses, and I was just really kind of following the photo of horses to do the different colors. This one is, I used Quinburn orange on the horse in the front, darkening up his belly and the parts that were in shadow, using my mixing the Quinburn orange with my cobalt blue violet to do that. And then the one further away, the one in the middle, was more of a palomino color. And I think I used my raw sienna for that. Leaving some white areas as highlights on their backs. And then the more distant horse was also a brown color, so I just went back in with my Quinburn orange to paint that one. Then the great blue heron, they really are blue. And my husband had taken a really good photo of one several years ago that I had. It's not in my reference photo, but we had another photo that I used. And I made his neck a little short just to make it fit in the painting okay, but they have really long necks. But you often see those along the shore of the river, and they stand there very silently until they can pounce on something and grab it to eat. And they're very quick about that. But they're really beautiful birds. I've seen white egrets too, but I see a lot of the blue heron along the Salt River. And I put a little bit of water at the front to give him something to stand in. And I like how that turned out. But I feel that there's a little dark on his head that I put in with some gray color. The color of the heron is very close to the color of the water, so it's hard to see him. So I'm going to try and fix that later on too by adding a little bit of white to him. Still going back and fiddling with that water. I probably should have just left it alone. I like to move around in my paintings just to let things dry, so I went up to where the lettering is, and I decided to paint that with my transparent orange color. The orange is the complement to blue, and I thought that would look good against the Salt River that I had painted with Red Mountain. And that actually really lightened up as it dried, and I went back and applied more color later on. You'll see that in the photo at the end. And here, I wanted to add a blue, but I probably made this too dark. I used Windsor blue, which is like a phthalo or a Prussian blue, and the lettering can hardly be seen, so I'll fix that later on. For the lettering for the words Salt River Horses, I decided to use a micron pen that I know is permanent ink, because I knew I wanted to go back and darken that orange color behind it. And so I used it was a permanent pen that I had, a micron pen that happened to have blue ink in it. So now I went back with my Dr. P.H. Martin pen white, and I'm adding some white to the river, and that helps to show some movement in the river, but it also breaks up all of that blue color that I had. And I thought that looked a little better. I also used it on some highlights on the heron, the great blue heron, just to make him stand out a little bit better against that blue river. So there you have it. That's my sketch of the Salt River Horses. And you'll see the finished piece that I scanned here in a moment. There it is. You can see that the orange is darker behind the Salt River Horses. I added some white to those letters. And I think overall, I like this sketch. It was pretty complicated. I would try to simplify it if I did it again. But I hope this helped you, and thanks so much for watching.